8 trillion additional liquidity to play with. So in the post-lockdown scenario, it will be that the liquidity glut that we've seen before the pandemic will be intensified. And the slowing trade and growth that we've seen before the pandemic will still be protracted. So the pandemic is therefore going to create a widening of the divergence of the parts of the global economic versus the global financial parts. That has been happening prior to the pandemic, that trade flows, or if you like, net export flows, that used to be the dominant outcome of globalization, has recently been overtaken by net capital flows as the dominant driver of globalization. So what the pandemic has done is to reduce trade flows further and to boost capital flows. So you have a post-pandemic outlook in which global capital flows are going to be the dominant vehicle of globalization. And countries need to prepare themselves for that eventuality. Countries that used historically, 30 years ago, 28 years ago, the conventional wisdom was you export or you die, you export or you perish. The post-pandemic reality will be closer to you attract capital inflows or you perish, because the opportunities to grow the exports are likely to be there, at least in the short term. It will take a while for trade and growth to recover, but liquidity will hit you in the face, right? From the onset of the recovery. That's my view.
So, okay, can we talk specifically now about the opportunities that you see, especially for African countries or developing economies? What specifically are those opportunities that you think we should be preparing for? I mean, you just explained trade and liquidity and the potential way of addressing our current situations by focusing on, we're recognizing that there's increased liquidity that cannot be used elsewhere. So given the state that we're in Africa, what are the things that an African country can be doing right now to prepare itself for the opportunity that we have in post-pandemic era? Or perhaps let's highlight the opportunities first before we talk about the action that should be taken.
Okay. The opportunities that the world presents African countries after the pandemic is more financial than real. Opportunities for growth or for export earning will be slow to pick up, but opportunities to attract capital flows will be bigger. So the post-pandemic green shoots will be mostly financial. And therefore, African countries must ensure that their policies are well aligned with that unfolding global reality. They need to reposition to get a fair share of the financial green shoots with which they can sustain their own growth and stability. In particular, they need to increase their share of FDI and remittance inflows. Those will become the main source of external liquidity, globally. And Nigeria and Africa need to attract larger inflows of FDI and diaspora remittances and deploy those into transport and energy infrastructure that will boost growth and trade. So the emphasis, this lockdown should offer African economies to brainstorm about how to attract what the world offers them. The world does not offer them brighter growth prospects now. The world does not offer them brighter export prospects. So there's no point trying to get what the world cannot offer you. Those are slowing down maybe for the next year or so. But the world offers you cheap liquidity. So you get, to the drawing board and ask the question, what must I do? And that leads us to, issue you have raised about what steps, what specific actions are we suggesting
Yes.
that, Africa or Nigeria should take,
Yes.
to get a fair share. Now, it will be up to Nigeria and African countries to decide which of the corporate assets that they own they are willing to sell to equity investors who will bring in brownfield FDI. It is up to African countries to determine which intangible assets like government monopoly rights that you want to license to investors who will bring greenfield FDI. So you sell part of your equity holdings in existing companies to get brownfield FDI, or you sell the rights to spaces where government has reserved for themselves, and that, that's common across Africa. So foreign investors come out. We did it in the GSM telephony, and investors came in. So Nigeria needs to do it, and Africa has to do it across all infrastructure. Open the space for investors and stop saying that there are infrastructure deficit when government holds on to monopoly in those sectors, or government owns the companies that operate there 100%. So it's about what are you offering. You cannot sit down, you can't adopt passive investment policies saying that when investors arrive, you're waiting for investors to arrive so you give them incentives. Investors never arrive. You offer investors what to buy. And every offer that we have made investors, if I go by the LNG, liquefied natural gas equity investment, if I go by the GSM telephony, investors are taking up. So it's about you offering investors something. If you offer them something, they will buy. That process of buying is what brings in external liquidity for you. And it seems that that's a very, very important lesson that African countries need to learn. And they have to learn it rapidly and, try to bring that to play once the lockdown ends.
But
the second, apart from, greenfield, brownfield, foreign direct investment, the third type of inflow, diaspora investment. Now, African countries can't sit down and hope that diaspora will send money home. You need to articulate a clear enough future that diaspora can invest in. You need to bring instruments on board, like India and China, they issue diaspora bonds. So it's up to the government, to clarify a vision, a plan for each of the countries and for the continent in which, you can point out to the diaspora, this is the space you can come in and play. And you can also securitize, your equity assets in international joint ventures in form of diaspora bonds or foreign currency bonds. Very broadly, this will be the types of specific steps that I will be encouraging Nigeria and other African countries to do. We should stop talking about wanting to borrow. We should stop talking about, the collapse in commodity prices has affected my revenue. So the story is not just about revenue and debt. We should bring their assets into play and the equity headroom that the assets will help them to unlock. That's how India is engaging the world. Their assets at the forefront and the equity, that you can buy. And that's how Saudi Arabia is attempting to engage the world. That's how Egypt, which is the only exception who has managed to get it right, but only in the last 2 or 3 years in Africa is engaging the world. You know, you bring strong enough propositions for equity investors and for diaspora, and when you can convince them, they will bring the money in.
Can I ask then? Presumably, African economies, African economists, people in government, people in central banks, they understand these things. I'm assuming, these are, well, not simple enough economics, but it makes a lot of sense. If you have asset, if you're sitting on asset, and if you can release that, that will invite a bit more investment and probably innovation that will help the whole economy grow. What do you think is stopping African countries from doing what you're suggesting? Is it a sort of like a constitutional issue, political issue, social issue? Is it because of um, some of the responsibilities or influences from outside the countries or within the countries? What is it that is stopping African countries on using the asset that they have to achieve good infrastructure that will enable economic growth?
Well, you can always ask that question, about any country and at any time. We are saying that India managed to get it right now, but they didn't always get it right. As up to 1990, they were in the best example of how to attract investment. They were one of the worst examples. They were closed to foreign investment. They were so distrustful of foreign investment. So when we are trying to articulate a consensus for policy reform, we shouldn't waste time asking ourselves why have we not come to this realization all this while? It's a waste of time. It's a cognitive challenge to start with. If I take Nigeria, for example, Nigerian leaders, whether political leaders or the appointees, the people running the central bank and other economic agencies, have lived in an environment where for decades you sleep and you wake up to a windfall. Mm-hmm. This stopped only middle of 2014. So you didn't have to worry yourself about how to get the money to fund the operations of government. Favorable terms of trade, favorable oil price gave you the money. So your own role is just to spend it. And when the price of oil collapsed, they probably are still hoping and wishing that it will come back up. Okay, so and as long as they hope it will come back up, their role is passive. Sit down, let it all fall into your lap, and then use it. And now, so since 2014, 2015, we've been happening it. Look, move on. What might be the new normal is that commodity prices are going to be low. To unlock new resources, you may be income poor because of the windfall, because of the shortfall. But you're asset rich. You've had 1.5 decades of oil boom. You have assets all over the place that are idle. Engage those assets, leverage on those assets to generate new revenue, to raise equity and pay down your debt and move on. So it's a question of how long it takes to convince them that they should stop hoping in vain that the price of oil will turn back up, that maybe OPEC will do another magic, because in 2016 we were saying unlock liquidity from your assets, but it turned out that OPEC was able to do a few abracadabra that propped up the price of oil, and OPEC is up to it again trying to do that. Yeah, it could also buy a couple of years in which the political leadership will not be able to muster the will to turn to assets, in which they're hoping that that next OPEC meeting, production costs will lift prices. Between now and then, let me go and borrow from Saudi Arabia. Let me go and borrow from China, or let me go and borrow from India. Not noticing that China, India, are leveraging on their own assets in a world in which export flows are declining. So let's hope that COVID, which is a temporary problem, is essentially going to be a temporary problem. Whether it's 3 months, whether it's 4 months, 6 months, or a year, that's temporary. Let's hope COVID presses the point home that, hey, look, bring your assets into play. You can't be so asset rich and be portraying yourself as income poor and therefore portraying yourself as a perpetual borrower. You want to borrow, 2.5 billion from World Bank, borrow 3 billion from European market. When you have a barracks on Victoria Island, you have a barracks in Ikoyi, you have a barracks in Maryland. If you can relocate that barracks to some more economic location and you repurpose and redevelop each of those 3 barracks I've mentioned, it can unlock for you every money to fund your budget for 2 full years. And you have hundreds of them across the country. You have hundreds of prisons on commercial location that earns no revenue but could earn revenue. So we abandon them. We keep our assets idle and we are looking to borrow money. So basically, it's a question of how long it takes for them to become convinced that this is the right thing to do. Just as they took an economic crisis for India to become convinced to travel on the path it's currently traveling in the early 90s.
So are you of the belief that this crisis will hopefully wake up Nigeria and other African countries to begin to use their assets to drive the economy of their country forward? Are you convinced that's going to happen, or this is not enough shock?
Well, if I did not believe so, I won't be saying it. And the alternative can be gruesome. Trying to continue in the paths that we have been coming on, that we ignore our assets, we ignore our equity issuance headroom, we don't want to prepare ourselves, for attracting market funds. We just want our neighbor to help us. You had one and a half decades of boom. Boom ascended. Within 5 years, you want your neighbor to help you. If your neighbor too was looking for somebody to help him, stop saying your neighbor should help you, as you make your bed. So you learn it less. So one of the pushback you get when you tell them about these things, these things are saying they're long term. Don't believe that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. They just say they're long term. They want money that they can borrow and they can rise in 3 months. They don't want any effort. Because, I don't know any way of generating revenue that gives you money overnight that is short term. Largely my views, and happy.
Thank you very much, sir. So the other thing I want to try and ask you just before you go is, what? So I work in economic development. I work with donor agencies, and they have pro-poor projects across the country, across the continent. And I just wondered if donor projects or donors have any role to play in either nudging the countries to begin to think in terms of asset utilization, or perhaps even the way to mop up this excess liquidity that potentially is already in the economy. What role do you think we can play as economic development professionals?
Well, the emphasis should be on the idea that development partners can bring to the table. The word donors can be ambiguous. It may be an outdated way to describe them. In the early 90s, donor funds were the largest type of external capital inflow for developing countries. All developing countries. But that has changed now. FDI and remittances are many times bigger than donor funds. Each of them are many times bigger than then they were not up to half of donor money. So you should call them development partners. They don't have deep enough pockets to be enough money to spread ideas. Maybe you should concentrate on how to help African countries to see the need to have a continental plan for attracting liquidity, to have a continental plan for deploying infrastructure that connects the different countries. Because if they deploy infrastructure, trade and growth will happen. But they don't have liquidity. That's why they can't deploy infrastructure. So donors should come in and promote conversation, where it matters, in how to get liquidity, how to get equity investment there, how to get remittances, and how to deploy those to build infrastructure. Now, trade and growth are ends. Infrastructure and liquidity are means. Once the means are deployed, the ends will be attained. African countries need to understand that. And that you need to be active to secure investment. You have to build something. Make up your mind that I'm selling this to equity investors. Not that you are sitting down waiting for them to arrive. They won't. They arrive elsewhere, where there are concrete offers on the table of equity ownership opportunity for them to come and take up. That's my view.
Doctor, thank you very much for the education. Thank you for sparing the time to talk to us about all of these issues. And it is hoped that some of the people that are listening will change the perception of what it is that we should be talking about in terms of conversation that will lead to economic growth, at least that will help us begin to move towards good growth with infrastructure development. And hopefully in the conversation we have in corridors. So thank you very much, Doctor. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've had a good understanding of the perspective of Dr. Ayo Teriba. He has expressed to us that really we have an opportunity in Africa to position ourselves for the excess liquidity that will be floating around, or that is floating around now and post pandemic, and that people like us in economic development should really be focusing on engaging with decision makers within these developing nations on how to use assets, how to attract this liquidity, and invest them in infrastructure that hopefully will lead to growth. What I especially like about his concluding remark is that liquidity and liquidity is a means, and the trade and the growth of the economy is exactly what we want to try and is the end. So we need to understand the means. We need to use the means so we can get the end. I'm especially grateful to him for coming to explain all of this thing to us, and hopefully we'll have him back to talk further about these things. So thank you very much for watching, and we continue to broadcast the opportunities that COVID-19 is bringing to us. We talked about market system development projects. Now we're talking we've just spoken with Dr. Teriba about national level opportunities. The next we'll be discussing about, we'll be talking to people in the private sector and see how what opportunities COVID-19 presents. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.